Welcome to the Coping Podcast, where we share strategies for coping with the stressors of life, especially the difficulties of parenting. And here is your host, Dr. Lee Weiss.
This is Dr. Lee Weiss. I am the host of the Coping Podcast, where I feature top experts on topics like raising healthy children, parenting, and so much more. This episode is brought to you by Coping Partners. Coping Partners is a mental health practice in the Chicago suburbs dedicated to helping children, adolescents, and adults. We help manage various challenges, including anxiety, divorce, behavioral issues, relationship problems, and much more. Check out more episodes of our podcast on our website at copingpartners.com, and you can contact us with any questions you have. Before introducing today's guest, I have a quick disclaimer. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only. This is not intended to provide mental health treatment and does not constitute a client-therapist relationship. The information provided is not a replacement for being assessed and evaluated by a licensed professional and is not intended to replace mental health or medical advice. And finally, today's guest is Dr. Michelle Cutler, a licensed clinical psychologist. Dr. Cutler has over 20 years of experience working with children and families. Dr. Cutler has specialized training in working with children and adolescents who have experienced physical or sexual abuse, neglect, or other trauma. She has specialized training in the field of pediatric psychology and children exposed to trauma. Dr. Cutler did a number of fellowships working with children and families who experienced physical and sexual abuse and even helped develop programming for the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. Dr. Cutler works in private practice, but also teaches at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, teaching doctoral-level classes, including child trauma, among others. For more information, check out her website at drcutlerandassociates.com, Dr. D.R. Cutler, C-U-T-L-E-R, and associates.com. So, on July 4th this year, instead of our usual community parade and festive celebrations in the town of Highland Park, Illinois, members of our community instead suffered a trauma, a mass shooting. And as you know, those who were in attendance were largely families with young children. So today, Dr. Cutler, I wanted to pick your brain and ask you some of the many questions that I'm hearing from concerned parents in the community who are understandably really worried about their kiddos. So my first question, I'm going to dive right in. First question from parents is, how do I possibly answer the why question? Why did this happen? Why would someone want to hurt us?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, right? So before we talk about the actual response, I just want to kind of name what's going on for our kids and for us right now, right? Which is we ourselves as parents might also be asking ourselves that question. And I just became aware as we started talking that really we're recording this the day after the month's anniversary, right? So things are still really very raw, and trauma symptoms are probably still very heightened. And while the crisis state has diminished a bit, right, things are settling in, we are certainly not out of it. So it's very normal. It's very common for not only kids to be wondering about how they can be safe again, but for us as parents to be feeling that same way, right? Which makes it so tricky. That's one of the horrific things about this experience is that we have to be here to help our kids when we ourselves are also experiencing great distress because of what happened. And not to put, I think the burden is already just from what you're saying can feel like it's on parents to have these answers. And both things are true, right? The first thing I'm going to say might sound like it's contradictory with the next thing is, which the first thing is, what we know about helping kids through a trauma is the most important factor, and this is across years of research, across my own clinical experience, and things that I've seen in front of me, is the most important factor in helping kids recover from a trauma is the presence and the response of supportive adults and caretakers, right? Which means that we're the most important people in helping kids get through this, which can feel like, exactly, right? It can feel like more responsibility. But at the same time, here's the flip side of it. It also means that by trusting our instincts and by doing the things that we know in the past have helped our kids already, that's going to go a long way, right? So just by, and then we'll come back and talk about how to answer your question is how do I help my kids feel safe again? But just by our kids knowing that we're there to help them and to try to find answers or to try to find ways to feel safe again, that in itself is going to go a long way for them. We don't have to have all the answers. Many times when kids ask us questions, they're really just saying, I'm scared and I need someone to know that and to reassure me. And so that's kind of like the mindset we want to have when kids are coming to us with questions.
But it does alleviate a little pressure, just saying you being there for your children is a huge piece of what's going to protect them.
Yeah. And much of that is what's going to come natural for parents who know their kids well, right? And who've been able to help them in the past. And it can feel like we have to have all the answers to these really difficult questions that we ourselves might not even know the answers to. We don't. That we just have to help our kids know that they're being heard.
Right.
We can talk a little more specifically about how to help our kids feel safe, if that would be helpful.
Absolutely, especially because a lot of the kids a lot of the kids who are around here are hearing a loud noise, let's say, from a thunderstorm or who knows what in their house, and they're having this kind of bodily reaction.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's understandable in the context of a gunshot a month ago, but I hear a lot of parents going, what do I do when they have that reaction? And how do I tell them they're safe?
So, so I'm going to say two things, right? And I'm going to say them now to make sure I come back to both of them, right? The first is going to be education, helping our kids to understand what's going on and making sure that we as parents know what's going on, and then reassurance, right? Some things that we actually can do to help kids know that they're safe, or to feel that they're safe, even if they cognitively know it, because those are two different things. So education, understanding what's going on in the moment when they have that reaction to a loud noise, right? That 6 weeks ago we wouldn't have even registered, but now we do, right? And that is helping kids to understand that basically our bodies, because what we went through is so extraordinary, right? So horrific, something we never could have expected, never would have thought would have happened, never could have prepared for. It has thrown our bodies out of whack, right? And we have an alarm system. Our body's got, and there's lots of ways to explain this to kids, but I think about the alarm system that we might have in our homes, right? That goes off if something isn't safe to alert the authorities, to alert us that we need to take care of something. And when we go through something as horrific as this shooting was, our body's alarm system gets out of whack, right? It becomes oversensitive, as it should, because we needed to be protected, right? So it kicked into gear that day. Exactly, right? And it helped us survive in the moment. And that was our body doing what it needed to do, right? And kids can relate to that, parents can relate to that. Sometimes you might look and say, like, why the heck did I do that thing? Looking back, it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense, right? Traumas don't necessarily make sense to us because they're not supposed to happen. That's what makes them so horrific. And so in our body's response to survive, our alarm system got a little oversensitive, right? Or a lot oversensitive. And that still hasn't been shut off, right? And it's still trying to keep us safe. And so what that means is when it gets reminded of something from that day, if it's something it hears or something it smells or something it thinks about or a feeling that reminds it of that day, those alarms are going to go off, right? To keep us safe. And there's nothing wrong with us because that happened. That's because that's happening. In fact, it's supposed to. But we just don't need it, right? We need to just say to our body, like, okay, thanks, alarm system, right? Like, I know you think something scary here is going on, but I'm actually okay.
It's just a loud noise from the thunder, or
exactly, right. And the body and the brain the body and the brain are two different processes, though. That's the thing, right? So you might cognitively know that it's just some thunder, but the body is still back there on the day that it happened, right? And we can help our kids understand that. And then we'll talk about the second piece is what they can do. But so when they're saying, I'm so scared, name what's going on, right? Here's your alarm system's going off. Your body's acting like it happened again because it got reminded of it. Here's the cognitive piece, but it's not happening again, right? But you are safe.
So reminding them of like the present moment and safety,
Yeah. Yeah.
different than the past.
Correct. Right. So that's the cognitive piece. So helping them, okay, here's what's happening, educating them. And we as parents got to do the same thing for ourselves.
Right.
And then what else do they need to feel safe sometimes? Because if they get it cognitively, their body might not be on board with that yet. So that's when we can try things that I'm sure you and your therapist work with clients on about calming the nervous system down, doing deep breathing, doing some mindfulness, connecting with things around them, right? Anything that brings them back to the present moment, more than just saying I'm safe or my parents telling me that I'm safe, connecting at a deeper level and knowing that they're actually not back there. They're here with their parents and they're okay.
Could you give us an example of like one of those exercises, something that parents maybe could even use at home with their kids?
Sure, sure. So the easiest one to describe over a podcast, because I can't show you physically, it's called grounding, right? And grounding is really the term that means just bringing us back to the present moment and feeling connected with that present moment. And there's things you can do to physically ground yourself, which are hard to explain over a podcast. But the other things that you can do, which is connected to physical sensation, is by, and it sounds silly and it sounds obvious, but it's really, really helpful because a trauma response is about the future, right? What's going to happen, being worried about what's going to happen next, and then the past, right? Like, here's what did happen. The moment, the present, that's where they are safe, and we want to help them feel connected to that. So just by looking around, and you can do a number of different things. You can have your kids describe 5 things that they see around them. And if they're in their room, you can say, tell me 5 things about your dresser right now. And have them name, and it sounds silly, but 5 things. It's blue, it's got different books. What's your favorite book on there, right? Looks like it'd be hard. What do you think it would sound like if we knocked on it? Okay, now look out your window and tell me 5 things you see outside of your window. And you can do this just with sight. It's also super helpful if you can do other senses, because that also connects on a deeper level with the nervous system. So not just what you see, but tell me something that you hear. If it makes sense, it can be tell me something that you smell. And then here's the physical piece that can be super helpful with calming the nervous system down, is just having them put their hands on something and tell me what it feels like, right? So a soft pillow or a fuzzy pillow or a hard thing, and connecting their hands to that object and describing what it feels like can take us out of the past, out of the future, and bring us back to the present.
Wow. It's so simple, but it sounds like it would be so effective.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and that's what many of these things are, right? It is just, and that's what I mean when I say we don't have to like overthink it. We don't have to have all those answers, but look where you are now. You are safe now, and I'm saying that to parents and to kids, right? We are safe now, and that's where we want to keep our focus. That's where we want to keep our energy.
Right. Oh, that's extremely helpful.
Good, good.
So I guess, going to another related topic, a lot of the kids, are again only a month out. A lot of the kids had attended the parade and they're nervous about returning to school.
Yeah.
And I understand because some kids were not there and may not be able to even relate, and other kids were affected quite profoundly. How do you kind of coach parents around helping their kids with the idea of returning to school?
So first thing is the advice that applies pretty much any time when we're talking to our kids is start with listening, right? So first pay attention to ourselves. How are we feeling? Okay, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling like I have to have all the answers. I don't know what I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. Stop, take a deep breath, right? Regulate ourselves, okay? Because that's the most important thing, that our kids know that we're okay. So that's the first piece of it. We don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, the best way we're going to help our kids is by actually letting them talk and not giving them the answers right away. So that's the first thing I would say is just listen. Reflect what you think they're feeling, right? So name it. Sounds like you're feeling really nervous about it. Pause. Give them a minute. Then you might feel antsy. Keep pausing, right? Give them some time, because sometimes if we jump in, then that's going to shut kids down, right? And then we won't hear what they're really worried about. So you want to reflect how they're feeling, and then give them the chance to share. And then you can ask questions, right? Is there anything specifically that you're worried about? And many times, again, just by giving them the chance to say how they're feeling, that's going to be enough for them. And then if there are specific questions, are there certain things that you think parents are hearing about the return to school that would be helpful to plan for?
I just think that, parents are trying to be extra sensitive to the different situations. So some families were just much more kind of front and center of this
Hmm.
trauma, physically wounded, emotionally wounded, whereas again, others weren't even there and, are just hearing the very bare minimum upon return to school. So I think the parents are worried that they want their kids to be extra sensitive and helpful to the
Yeah,
kids who are
yeah,
more at the front and the center, and kind of how they can talk to their kids about being a good friend. What does that look like in the
sure.
context of this trauma?
And how wonderful in the context of all of this, right? That parents are still, which has been the case since this happened, thinking about how to be supportive to other kids and other families, right? The
Yeah,
community
it's a
response has been
close knit
amazing.
community, and I do think that it's got to be a protective factor that people really are
Absolutely.
showing up for each other. But yeah, this is one of those tricky ones.
Yeah. And again, we'll come back and talk about what to say to your kids. But the other piece I want to help parents to remember is they don't have to manage this on their own, right? One of the wonderful things about this community is not just the people that have come in to support each other, but the resources that are there. So the school is going to be there to help with these types of things, right? The challenge and the advantage of this is that the community experienced it together, right? And that means it is going to be on everybody's mind, right? Nobody has to explain what's going on. Everyone's going to know that everyone else had dealt with it, right?
Right,
It's
right,
no secrets in that sense.
right. Not like an isolated trauma that you
Exactly,
experience
right.
alone.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly, right. And it's a shared trauma, so people know that they're not alone in what they experience.
right,
So the school counselors and then the specific teams that have come in to help will be there to help kids navigate some of these difficulties. And if parents want to be proactive, I would again just first check in and see, is this really something that my child already asked me about, or does my child have issues with being a good friend anyway before this, or is it my own anxiety that I'm just worried about it, right? And if it's the third, then I would just say, let's wait to see, right? If that,
right,
and if you want to be proactive, it can be just about naming it for your child, right? And checking in, how are you feeling about going back to school? And this is probably going to be on everybody's mind. And yes, you might see some people who are physically different because of this, certainly emotionally different because of this, maybe even just different about how they're able to do schoolwork, right? Everyone's been affected in their own way.
right.
And then just like parents are already talking to kids, um, to just remind them that part of being a good friend is thinking about how the other person would feel, right? And so
Kind of reminding them of basic empathy.
yeah, exactly. Basic empathy, right? And even though they might have questions, they might be very curious, they might be really interested, especially if they've heard things about these kids, that it's best to just follow their friend's lead on this in terms of bringing things up, because that's going to help make them a good friend.
Right. I love that. That's just a kind thing to do in general is to follow
Yeah,
follow the others.
yeah, yeah. And it's that little lesson that like we're kind of always learning, like who is this for? And so, although the kids might be curious, which is okay, right? This is why this conversation before can be helpful.
Mhm.
Um, we don't want them to satisfy their curiosity at the expense of someone else's feelings.
Right, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I know a lot of the parents are wondering, are they going to do this active shooter drill in schools? And I'm kind of hopeful maybe they'll push it off a little bit, but I think they're going to still do these things. And in fact, some
Okay.
of the kids reported who were at the parade feeling like they actually knew what to do, which
Yeah.
was kind of like comforting and alarming at the same time, because
Yeah.
of these drills
Yeah.
that we've been exposed to.
Yeah. And I think that's, you and I are both making this just like sad, upset, just almost disgusted, horrified
Yeah,
face at what our kids are having to prepare for in the world right now, it can feel like, right? And that's our stuff, right? And I think just validating that for kids that this is hard and this is scary. And no, I don't know what. So it sounds like they're moving ahead with their regular drills, but
We don't know. We're just, people are just kind of wondering aloud and worrying a little bit about it, it sounds like.
Yeah. And all of that is still about the same things it was before, right? Helping us to be prepared. And again, the chances of something like this happening are so rare, right? And I, as your parent, would never send you to school if I didn't think that it was safe enough for you to go, because school is so important. And I know how much you love school, and I know how important your friends are, right? And we were extremely unlikely, right? And then however old your kid is, you multiply the number of varies, and how very, 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 very unlucky we were that this happened to us, and how very, 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 very small of a chance there is that something like this would happen again. And that's why I'm your mom, and I love you, and I know that it's best for you to go to school. And here's where again we have to check in with ourselves, and know that it's the right choice.
Confidently.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you got to find the words that work for you, right? If you don't want to say something you don't feel, right? So it's okay to say, of course, I feel a little bit nervous too. And I know that what's best for us is to keep doing the things that we need to do, right? That make us happy. And again, I wouldn't put you in that situation if I didn't think it was important enough.
Right. And parents can just remind kids too of all different levels of security and safety that the
that's
school has
super
in place
helpful.
too, because they have so much. One of the toughest questions I would say that I was asked, that I don't know that there's a great answer for, honestly, to your point, was at the parade there were, firemen and police who had just marched through before this incident happened. And so the kids were kind of wondering, well, if this could happen where there's so many police, how am I safe? So again, that same question, which there's probably not a great answer to, but I'm just curious again, what you would recommend a parent saying or teacher saying if the kids bring that up.
I'm going to say the same thing, right? We got to address the body and the brain here, right? So your body is telling you that you're not safe at these things because of what happened, right? Good. That's your body trying to protect yourself, but remember, your body still has that super sensitive alarm system. But to your brain, right? And then we go back to how unlikely something like this is to have happened, right? And that yes, it did happen with all of these people there that were designed to keep us safe, and that ultimately did keep so many people safe and did help. So of course that feels scary, and we know that the rest of life is so important that that we're still going to keep living it in that sense.
So I'm hearing again the reflection of their fears, right? I know that was really, really scary. It is so rare. And again, this is kind of what we do to keep you safe. And I actually think that the fact that the police were able to respond, you can focus on that piece of it too. The helpers who were there. But these questions are triggering for parents because it does feel unsafe too. It's understandable.
Yeah. I mean, because they're saying what we're thinking, right? And I love what you said about kind of where you put your focus, right? So that's what we're going to reflect and validate, and then slowly help to shift that focus, right? Because sure, you can stay in this place but all these police were there and this horrible thing happened, and your body and your brain. But then we can also, what happens then when you think about how quickly people came in to help, right? And do you remember what they did to tell us how to stay safe afterwards? And they were right? And we listened to them, and then we help the kids to kind of stay in that space. And that even just shifting that focus shows them too that they are able to do that, right? So now we're talking about a coping skill, is shifting the focus out of the place where the alarm system is going off, and then into a place where they can feel cared for and protected, and connect with that too.
That's so helpful. I think one pressing question for most parents is, again, 4 weeks after this trauma, we expect that their bodies are not regulated the way that we hope they will be one day. But at what point do you feel like they should be seeking out a therapist like you with expertise in trauma? At what
Sure.
point is this not, not a normal response to stress and more problematic?
So, in general, okay, what we know in general is that the highest period of symptoms, symptoms of meaning like diagnosis for yeah, some sort of mental health disorder, but that's not even, you don't even need that to kind of be affected here, right? But the most acute post-traumatic symptoms do abate after about a month to 6 weeks. Okay. In many cases, particularly with attuned, caring, resourceful parents that have resources, typically 4 to 6 weeks, many of the symptoms should improve. Is after that point or before that point, if the symptoms are really interfering with daily functioning, that they might need additional support to help cope with them, right? And that being said, of course, like I'm always going to say counseling can be helpful.
Right. It's never going to be harmful to be
Right.
active,
No,
but this is
but
when people really should consider
yes.
counseling.
Yeah, because it is normal. We would expect difficulty sleeping, right? We'd expect more anxiety expressed and not expressed, how it comes out with kids' eating patterns or somatically, right? All of those things, even nightmares, intrusive symptoms, or avoidance, the opposite
Yeah.
of that, right? Where they don't want to go to the place where it happened. And if it's interfering with daily life, then that's also a time when we want to get them some additional support. So, thinking about avoidance, it's understandable if they and we want to avoid things, some direct things, right? Like the place where it happened or things that remind us about where it happened, crowds or schools, right? Or big outside events. Understandable why they would want to avoid those places, and we would too, right? And our body's alarm system is going to go off, and cognitively, right? We have seen that they might not be safe. And bit by bit, right, we can help them to feel safe again. Because the thing with avoidance is, and you know this, working with anxiety, it does help in the short term, right? It does help us to feel better and to feel safer. But then in the long term, it just shows our kids that they really should be avoiding these things, right? And they can't handle the anxiety that goes along with it. So they should be staying away. So bit by bit, looking for opportunities to try the things that are making them scared, right? That's setting their alarm systems off. So they can learn to cope with it, right? Learn to regulate themselves when their alarm systems do go off, and see that they can tolerate it, that they can do these things to get back to doing the things that are going to help them, the structure, the routine, the activities, right? All of those things pre-trauma that made them who they are.
Right.
It's going to be
Even like
important to get back
returning
to.
to, Central Avenue where Dairy Queen
Absolutely.
is and Walker Brothers are.
Absolutely.
And I
Yep.
think parents intuitively have been saying, like, I didn't want them to go the next day. I understood that this would be difficult, but we needed to get back there. So they
Good for them.
understood that.
Yeah. Yep. And it's bit by bit, right? So it
Right.
doesn't have to be, we're going to go and spend the whole day there,
Right. Go
right?
to every
You
single
go.
store.
No. You go and you say, like, let's give this an hour and see how you're doing. And if you want to go back home, cool. If you're okay staying, that's fine too, right? So it doesn't have to be all at once. But we don't, if we are able to avoiding things altogether, that is going to help with that anxiety.
This is so helpful. I was going to ask if there is just any general advice that, maybe I didn't ask about that you would like to impart to us, or favorite resources, books, podcasts, anything, websites, anything that you would recommend parents, get familiar with.
Sure. So, I mean, I think I've said this, but just to reiterate the important role that parents play, which is again not meant to put pressure, but more to instill confidence in parents, right? That if you've been able to help your child in the past, you can help them through this too, right? You know your child's best, and we don't have to have all of the answers, but we do have to take care of ourselves so that we can be there for them, right? So I think that's kind of the biggest. If people take one thing from our conversation, I hope it would be something like that. And in terms of resources, there are so many out there, and even just talking to people in the community, I know there's been a lot of sharing of resources with books about trauma, and even some specific ones about mass shootings that have come out, which are so helpful. So books for kids to see that they're not alone helps with that experience, and then also gives them a little bit of distance. If they're not able to talk about their own experience, they can see it through someone else's experience. And then I think the best resource for parents, and this is kind of I would say like the landing site for the experts in the field. I'll say the acronym first and then the organization, but nctsn.org. I want to double check that now, but might be .com. But it's the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And, one of the things, and I've been saying this to lots of parents, unfortunately, trauma has always been happening, right? It's always been here. So it hasn't become more prevalent, but we've gotten a lot better at talking about it. And we've gotten a lot better at knowing how to help. And we really do know how to help kids and families who have been exposed to trauma. There's research the research has just blown up in the past 10 to 20 years, right? And more being done every day. And thankfully, actually more being funded every day to figure out how to best help kids and families. So parents don't have to feel like they have to fumble their way around this. There's therapists that can help, and there's organizations that can help. And NCTSN is a great landing page for that. They've got resources for parents, resources for schools, resources for professionals. And I think that's a great place to start. So nctsn.org or com, whichever one it is.
Okay, we'll find it for sure.
Okay.
We'll put it again. Thank you so much, Michelle. We want to point everyone to your website. It is drcutlerandassociates.com. And if you have any questions, you can go to her website and contact her. Dr. Cutler is available for clinical work. And so if you've been impacted by this trauma or any trauma and you'd like an expert, reach out to her. She and her group of therapists are ready to support and help our community. And we're so grateful for all your consultation and your support and guidance. Also, check out more episodes of our podcast. You can go to copingpartners.com and click on the podcast page to listen to more episodes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Coping Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. And check out our podcast page at copingpartners.com.